studies in chaos theory that are most easily duplicated by looking at piles of sand as they form. And what we know is that if you're watching a pile of sand like in an hourglass, you may notice that periodically the little mountain of sand will collapse. And then after it collapses, it quickly rejuvenates back into its original shape, but it will be higher. So like as the pile gets higher, you'll see an avalanche on one side and it comes back.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's what happens, and this has actually been modeled in very powerful supercomputers where every single particle of sand is a separate part of the program.
Mm-hmm.
What they find is that up until a certain point, you can tell exactly where each particle is going to be and where it's going to go, and you can predict its behavior and its movement.
Mm-hmm.
But right before the avalanche happens, there is something called criticality. And criticality is where the system gets thrown into chaos. And it's where it's just the final tipping point right before the avalanche. And when you get criticality, you get something called self-organizing criticality. And this is very strange, and we still don't really have a good explanation for it in any mainstream sense. When that particle is when the sand pile is about to collapse, you cannot predict how it's going to collapse or where it's going to go. All you know is that it's going to change, that almost every agent in the system is going to move.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times we discover that it's one or two agents in the entire system that become the leverage point for the whole change to occur.
Mm.
And so it can happen on a very small level, but basically we also know that once it changes, it always evolves intelligently into a more organized structure. So you can look at it as sand particles, but then that's just the most mundane way to look at it. It becomes a lot more interesting when you look at it in terms of a society or an economy. And so the key again, and this is where it starts to cross over into the so-called Illuminati or the negative elite, the world leaders with their philosophy of order out of chaos.
Sure.
There is some truth to that in the sense that when the system becomes highly destabilized, there will be random shifts that suddenly self-organize into higher complexity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons why I tell people, don't get all hung up about an economic collapse. I know they're saying that, the economy's about to collapse or whatever.
Yeah.
If there is a weakening of the economy, it's only going to reorganize at a higher level of criticality and basically restructure itself very rapidly because, we have an ongoing medium of exchange and communication that's so robust now that it's not going to be like it was before where you can have single countries that collapse and it doesn't affect anything else and they don't bounce back very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also, the reason why I bring this up is that you're absolutely right. This is the moment. It's because people are starting to throw doubts and questions on everything that they have assumed to be true.
Yeah.
We've lived in a lie. We've lived in a world that gives you a media that tells you, don't look at the man behind the curtain. Don't think that there's any problem. Your government is your family. Your government is like your father and mother. And they will take care of you and they will protect you from the bad man. Well, the bad man is the government, right? So when you start to see that, it starts to throw into question all these assumptions you've had, all of these. Most people basically want to live with the trust of a child. They want to just sort of have their life and, earn money and drive their car and watch TV and come home on the weekend and hang out with their children.
Sure.
They don't really want to think too much. They don't want to work too hard. They expect that life is a private phenomenon, that they're not really that integrated with their society, that they're essentially separate entities. Now, I know, and I'm generalizing horribly, and I know in Europe, and I'm sure in Sweden in particular and other countries, it's less like that. But in America, it's very isolated. You can be right next door to someone, have no idea who they are. And it happens all the time. So we live in a very isolated culture. The Western world in general has a lot of separation. So, and what's happening is there's more and more outside nudges telling us that we need to pull together and that we're not doing it right. Global warming is another terrific example, right? Here you have the very basic nature of your livelihood, the earth, apparently turning on you, making your life dangerous, making your life unpredictable, and depending on where in the world you are, there's no place safe on the Earth. People are like, oh, where's the safety land? Well, guess what? You can't have one because everywhere is experiencing climate change.
Mm-hmm.
You get flooding, ice storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, mudslides, wildfires, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a fire out my window, 2 times in a row in the last 2 months.
Oh, yeah, the big...
it myself.
Yeah, sheesh.
So all this does is it starts to say, okay, are we doing it right or are we making a mistake?
Mm-hmm.
And the ultimate point that our film is making is that all of these phenomena are the result of our own state of consciousness. And our state of consciousness directly interacts with these phenomena. The first movie, we don't really go into how our consciousness interacts with global warming, but we do express how the average person, each ordinary person, and their level of either fear or trust has a huge impact on the overall level of war and disharmony in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so these global meditations and things like that actually have a very profound effect, and that has been scientifically proven. So that's our goal. Our goal is to get people to realize that if they can exist in a state of harmony in their own mind and decrease the clutter, that is a field effect that they're then sending out into the cosmos and the Earth, which affects everyone else's behavior in a very positive way. So a lot of people are doing spiritual work, and they're trying to be very enlightened and very evolved. It's important to remember that that is not just something you're doing for yourself. Even if you don't think that you're having any effect, it's very important that you keep going because you have a huge effect on the field. And that really, that's what my Science of Peace is about. That's what the film is about. It's all focusing on that basic point, that we have much more power over these events than we would believe we do normally.
And you're also saying here that this chaos that you're describing, like the Illuminati, global warming, or even fear of global warming, end of the world scenario films, whatever, this chaos is a catalyst to wake people up at this particular time, right?
Exactly right. And whatever comes out after the little avalanche is much more organized and much more evolved than what we had before. Just like the little sand pile that has, restructures to a higher level. That's what the Earth is going through now. It doesn't happen as rapidly as it would inside an hourglass with sand, but it's happening now. And so one way that you could sort of define 2012 is sort of like the arbitrary focal point for where all of this is going.
And
actually a lot more complex than that, but that's just one way to look at it.
Sure. And do you believe that 2012 in itself actually is some form of convergence?
I obviously do. It's not as simple as something that I've explained so far, but what we're ultimately apparently dealing with is the basic nature of matter, energy, and consciousness shifting. And that gets into harmonics. So let's talk a little bit about that just so we can set up that point. If you look at the work of Dr. Hans Jenny, and it's spelled Jenny,
cymatics, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you guys have written about that. But he talks about how you can vibrate some water that has little particles of dust in them, and it's like a milky water. It's called a colloidal suspension. The little particles are called colloids. You vibrate this water at pure sound resonances, like the white keys on the piano. When you do that, you discover that instead of the water just being milky white, the particles start lining up into little geometric shapes. And depending on what tone you play, that determines what shape you get. And the higher your pitch goes, the more complicated the shape is, and the more beautiful and geometrically interconnected it is. They almost look a little like snowflakes as you get into the higher pitches.
Yeah.
Now, this is not just a phenomenon that's like a gee whiz, look at that, isn't that neat? This is actually the basis of the universe and how matter is constructed. Matter, you could think of matter as like, if you've ever played that game where you get a jar and you fill it with water that's got tons and tons of sugar in it. And then if you hang a string down into that water, what happens? If you let it sit there for a while.
I've actually never done this, so please explain.
You grow rock candy. It's called rock candy.
Ah, okay, I see. Okay.
Sugar crystals will start growing on your string, and the water will try to return to water. It's trying to get rid of all that sugar you put in there.
I see.
So the sugar crystallizes.
Ah.
And then you pull it out, and you have a treat you can give to a child. Well, what's happening is, in terms of physical matter, you could think of physical matter as like a crystal that's coming out of this fluid. And the fluid is something we usually can't see, and we can't measure because it's in what I call time-space. It's this parallel reality that's on the other side where time is three-dimensional and space is only one-dimensional. So over there, if you pop over there, and that's what all this Stargate travel is about, you can move around physically. You can move, 10 feet forward, but you might move 10 years in our reality. So if that's why in the ancient legends of the fairy circles, you have to go into the fairy ring and then come back out the same way. You don't see the fairies until you go inside the fairy circle. Once you go into the fairy circle, then you find yourself in this parallel reality, and you see all these little people. And then if you actually leave the fairy circle in a different way that you went in, then you may time travel when you come back out. Jeez. Now, there's actually a bunch of ancient medieval legends of this that you can read about. This is based on a very real phenomenon. There are certain times and certain places on the Earth where these interdimensional crossing points will happen. And the ancients were very well aware of this, and guess what they did? They built all these structures on those exact points. Like Stonehenge, like the Great Pyramid, like Nanmatal or Easter Island. These are structures that have a technology. It's just a technology that we've totally lost track of. But at the right time of the year, if you get the right planetary alignment and so forth, you get a temporary crossover into time-space.
So this is a natural kind of Stargate?
Oh, yeah. And it's a great secret that has been kept from us by the people who know about it and have been using it. And then, the ancient technology has now interfaced with technology derived from crashed UFOs, in which, it's actually not as difficult as it sounds. And so the basis of all this, again, is you have these two inverted realities. You have space-time and time-space. And there's a constant energetic flow between the two. The energy flows essentially like a fluid. What we only see is the crystals of the fluid. So it's like a crystallized form of this fluid. Now, the crystal, as I originally mentioned, goes back to harmonics, like Dr. Yenny, the cymatics thing. If you vibrate the fluid at a certain frequency, you get a certain geometry. Well, you look down at, like if you look at table salt, what's the shape of a salt crystal? Everybody knows that. They're little cubes. So, sodium and chlorine come together and they form a little cube, and that's even at the smallest, tiniest level, that's what it looks like. Well, a cube is one of these basic geometric shapes that you get by vibrating a fluid at a certain sound frequency. So actually, all of physical matter, everything we have around us, is the result of a frequency. And what that also means, as I said, is that if you amplify the frequency, the structure of the matter will change. You can actually transform matter. Here's another thing, which I'm giving you some exclusive stuff I've never said publicly before.
Sounds good.
The science of alchemy is based on the same principle of this fairy ring and the other things I've been telling you about, like Stonehenge and so forth. You can get lead to turn into gold if you do it at the right time of the year in the right place. Really? But it's extremely dangerous. It's very, very volatile. It's very likely that you can have an explosion. Because when you're dealing with this, you're talking about gating in a tremendous amount of energy from the other reality. Because as many people have discussed, zero-point energy is extremely powerful. We only have such a tiny teaspoonful of this energy that's around us that we're using. It's